Let me begin by putting on record that I think that the bedroom tax should be abolished. This is a pernicious and vindictive measure, and it blames people and is causing a huge deal of distress. So it blames, then punishes people who very often have had little control or choice over the house they live in. It punishes people whose crime is not to earn enough money to afford their rent. It punishes people who have lived in their council house for most of their life but have temporarily lost their job and are now deemed as having an extra bedroom. It punishes the victims for a failure of housing supply, punishing those who would like to move to a smaller property but can't because none are available.
I'm grateful to the Honourable Lady for giving way. She says that this policy, the bedroom tax, should be abolished. Would she agree with me that it should be abolished for private sector tenants as well?
I think there's a fundamental misunderstanding about the nature of social housing. When my parents got their first council house, they thought that was their home for life. That's not the same for people who very often are renting in the private sector, for whom it is a stepping stone in order for them perhaps to buy a house. But my parents never thought they would have that expectation. And anybody who's lived in a council house would understand that.
Absolutely.
The bedroom tax hits the most vulnerable, many of whom don't qualify, despite everything that's been said, for discretionary housing payments. And in Aberdeen, I've been hearing their stories. People who have fallen on hard times, who become victims of drug or alcohol abuse, but are now trying to get their lives back together, but can't because they're being hit by the bedroom tax. Such as the 37-year-old merchant seaman, whose injuries for a car accident meant he needed a ground floor flat, so was allocated a two-bedroom one because that was all there was. He is hit by the bedroom tax. Or the 47-year-old disabled man who continued to live in the two-bedroom flat which he'd been born in after his parents died, hit by the bedroom tax.
I'm very grateful to her for giving way, and she's making a very powerful case. I wonder if she shares my concern about the scale of debt that's being created by this government's very brutal policy, because Freedom of Information figures show that 1 in 3 council house tenants are being pushed into rent arrears. And given precisely the fact that not enough smaller properties exist, how is that possibly fair or progressive?
And indeed, many of the examples I'm giving, Mr Deputy Speaker, their situation has been made worse because they now have housing debt, so they can't be rehoused, and so some of them are having to go back to the very hostels they thought they were escaping from. And another example was a 52-year-old woman who suffers from depression and chronic anxiety, who depends on her neighbour, so can't contemplate a move, hit by the bedroom tax, and I had many, many more. So if people who would move but can't, as suitable properties are not available, and those who can't move because they would lose the support they depend on to lead the independent life that they have. So even if the government doesn't accept the Labour proposal to scrap this tax, and I always live in hope, but even if they don't, there is something the government could do, I think should do and must do, and that's to extend the exemptions. And I'm going to propose just 2 very modest ones. I think the government should accept these, because obviously their backbenchers already think that these things are exempt from the way that they've been shouting this afternoon. So the first one is homes which have been specifically adapted for a disabled family. And I really don't accept the Minister's argument. Here's the man who thinks he's going to change the whole of the pension system in Great Britain, but he's not clever enough to come up with a definition of an adapted home. I don't think so. The second one is where it's unreasonable to expect a couple to share a bed or a room because one or both have a disability. So in terms of the first one, it's incredibly difficult and expensive for someone who needs adaptations in their house to move. There is recognition in council tax regulations that people who need extra room because of a disability pay council tax on a lower band. It's therefore ridiculous that this space requirement isn't recognised in housing benefit regulations. And I know from personal experience how difficult it is to find suitable housing and how long adaptations take. And I think that that is something the government could easily do. The second thing they could do is where they've got two adults who are having to share a room. Now, whoever in government thought it was acceptable to expect a couple where one is disabled to share a bedroom clearly has no idea of the size of the average council house bedroom. It's certainly not big enough for a hospital bed, for possibly some lifting equipment, and a second bed for the other person to sleep in.
Yeah.
And on top of that, that arrangement is not going to give a good night's sleep to someone who may actually also have an important caring role. And discretionary housing payment is not a solution. It's meant to be transitional. It's meant to be to get people from where they are now to where the government wants them to be. But these situations are permanent. Therefore, these are just two examples. I could also talk about disabled children, but certainly these should be exempt. I won't give way because of time. I don't believe that those people in these situations should have to apply year on year on year on year. No matter how much money is made available, I think it is wrong that they are having to actually apply for a discretionary, and that's also a key because it doesn't mean that they're necessarily going to get it. So even if ministers don't accept the need to get rid of this particular measure, the very least they can do is to extend the exemptions. And besides, these modest measures won't cost any more money if what the government says is right, because they're already getting discretionary housing payments. But what it will do is alleviate a great deal of anxiety, and will certainly make this appalling measure a bit more bearable for some of our constituents. But I still stand by my original comments, Mr Deputy Speaker, that it is time that this measure was abolished.